السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Welcome everybody to this international conference organized jointly by important institutions from Morocco, Qadi Iyad University and University Mohammed VI Polytechnic, and the well-known University Arizona State University in United States of America. Before I hand the floor to the official people speaking on behalf of these institutions, I would like to say a word to thank many people who have made this conference possible. These people are from Morocco, from United States of America, and Europe. The list in front of me is very long. However, these people have impacted our life, how they worked. They showed great values, disponibility, readiness to invest time, to invest effort. And among these people, there are those who cared for this event, even when their life is busy, their work is busy, and some of them have circumstances at home or around them. So on behalf of the participants, on behalf of everybody, I would like to thank them very much. There are also people who support this and institutions who supported this event from Morocco and Europe. The program of Master Studies of Interpreting at the University of Qadi Iyad. There is also the language lab at the University of Mohammed VI Polytechnic. The language lab at the University Copernicus in Turin in Poland, and the European Institute or Scientific Institute. So thank you all. This conference is set to connect people. This conference is set to say to people, stay together, stay connected if not possible, stay connected, stay safe. And this is the mission why this conference is here. So I would like to give the floor to the University of Qadi Iyad on behalf of the president. We have here present in person Mrs. Fatim Zahra Iflahan as vice president, our great lady.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Dr. Mohammed Al-Jafari. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much to all of you for this great organization. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President of the University of UM6P, sorry, excuse me, Mr. Punya Mishra, Associate Dean At Arizona State University, Mr. Ahmed Qadim, Dean of the Faculty of Language of Arabic Language at Qadi Iyad University, and Professor Fatima Salami, Director of the lab LRC. Dear colleagues, dear partners and friends, I would say, Tanya, Nicole, and everybody else, and Dr. Shuel are our friends. We've had so many things in common. We've done so many things in common, and I hope we'll be able to continue what we started. I would like to express my great pleasure and honor to be at the opening of this very important conference. On behalf of Professor Moulay Hassan Habib, Mr. President of the University Qadi Iyad, I would like to welcome you all to Marrakesh, to welcome you all those of you who are not from Marrakesh, all those of you who are not from Morocco, and to welcome you all at Qadi Iyad University that is hosting this very important event. As you know, distance learning, and especially language learning, is very important. It has shown its importance lately during this crisis. We have seen what challenges, what important opportunities also are possible for all of us. But beyond all this, and above all, I think that what is important is that it has opened up our eyes on the great opportunities of collaborative work, of global alliances, of I would say collective intelligence to go further with education, to give meaningful education that is good for all, that is equitable, and that is equal for all. Thank you very much to the dear organizers from the LRC lab, but also to the everybody who is by far or near related to this great event, the translators. Thank you to the panelists. I wish that, and I'm sure that this is going to be an excellent conference because of the topic. It's a good initiative at this very moment. That we are all nationally discussing the possibilities of a different model for our education. It will enrich the debate, I'm sure. And thank you to the participants, to the students, to the organizers. And I wish you a fruitful conference, enriching discussions. But above all, I wish these global alliances, these regional alliances will continue for the best of our students, for the benefit of our universities. Thank you all and wish you all the best. Thanks a lot, Dr. Jafari. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Professor and Vice President Fatima Zahra Iflahan. Because we have there is some events here that coincide with this event too. There is the visit of ministry in Marrakesh, and there is meeting with the universities and so on. Now, Mr. Hisham Habti, who is the president of the University of Mohammed VI Polytechnic, is going to give a word to the participants of this event, and this is the video. I'm going to share.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear partners, faculty, and conference attendees. My name is Hisham El Habti, President of Mohammed VI Polytechnic University. We are proud to partner with Qadi Iyad University and Arizona State University for this conference that comes as a prompt intellectual response to the very special circumstances imposed by the pandemic worldwide. Our institution, like most institutions around the world, accelerated the digitalization of its programs, including languages, to countermeasure the pandemic. Language education is indeed the most challenging area in distance learning, and this e-conference has brilliantly brought together the most important aspects of language education in its virtual format. It comes as a culmination of the joint efforts invested by our institutions. It is a significant academic investment for all the stakeholders: leadership, faculty, students, and research. These are reflected in the areas that the conference strengths cover, namely teaching, learning, assessment, and research. All these areas have undergone major evolutions since COVID-19 locked us out of our campuses and made of connected screens our only option. Adaptation to the new reality came in all shapes and forms, but it was mostly informed by research in language education in the age of information technology. I am therefore confident that the exchange with the authors of this conference will serve as a consolidation of the existing practices in distance learning and a foundation for future academic events that will make our partnership a world reference in language education. Finally, I would like to thank everyone who has contributed to making the conference happen. Wishing you all a fruitful exchange. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Hisham Al-Habti, the president of University Mohammed VI Polytechnic in Ben Gurion. On behalf of the University of Arizona State University in United States as partner and collaborative partner in this event, Mr. Punya Mishra is going to give a word to the participants in this webinar.
Welcome, students, faculty, and other esteemed colleagues. I am Punya Mishra, Associate Dean for Scholarship and Innovation at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. Welcome, students, faculty, and other esteemed colleagues. I am Punya Mishra, Associate Dean for Scholarship and Innovation at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University. We are grateful for the chance to partner with Qadi Ayad University and the University of Mohammed VI Polytechnic on this important event. The scale of the COVID-19 crisis and its impact on global education is hard to comprehend. UNESCO's website that tracks educational disruption showed that in a mere 45 days, starting in mid-February 2020, schools in over 180 countries shut their doors, affecting the education of 1.5 billion learners. And suddenly we were all part of this unprecedented global educational social experiment. And as educators, we have collectively witnessed a year of significant transformation in teaching. Over the past year or so, I've had a chance to speak with educators from across the world, and two things have stood out for me. First, just how similar our concerns and challenges are across the globe. And I saw the shared commitment to learners and learning that brings us educators together. The second thing that stood out was just how creative and amazing teachers and educators have been to try in incredibly difficult conditions to make the needs of the learners in their care. I have never been prouder of my profession. However, we must recognize that these changes we had to make were not deliberate or strategic. It was a quick response to an immediate need, to a crisis. However, I think it is up to us now collectively to reflect on this experience and derive a new type of wisdom to help our field. It is time to ask ourselves, why not? Do we want to go back to schools as they were, or can we do something different? What are the innovations you would like to see in education? What is your vision for language learning in the future, and what role should technology play? And how can we work collaboratively to create this new vision? We live in a global world where communication and connection is critical for our future, for the world's future. Learning a new language gives us tools to see the world. It enriches us in ways that we cannot even imagine. So thank you again for your time. Our colleagues at Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College and I are honored to have the opportunity to engage in the important conversation and connections certain to rise from this international event. Thank you again. Have a wonderful session.
So, thanks a lot, Mr. Punia Mishra from the university, the American University of Arizona. So now, as I said, because of the with the minister, the dean of the faculty of Arabic language is also present there. So his word is as follows.
الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. يسعدنا في كلية اللغة العربية التابعة لجامعة القاضي عياض بمراكش أن نستضيف هذا النشاط العلمي المميز والمتعلق بالتعليم عن بعد. ويأتي هذا الحدث في سياق الأنشطة التي تقوم بها كلية اللغة العربية لمواكبة الطلاب في شتى مجالات التكوين، خاصة مع ظهور هذه الجائحة. ويعد التعليم عن بعد أحد طرق التعليم الحديثة التي تتيح للطالب أن يبقى على علاقة مع الأستاذ بطريقة مغايرة للطريقة التقليدية في التدريس، بالانتقال من المؤسسات الرسمية إلى أماكن جغرافية أخرى، وذلك بسبب تعذر التدريس في الظروف العادية. ويعد الإنترنت من أهم الوسائل الكفيلة بنجاعة وإنجاح التعليم عن بعد، خاصة مع تطور شبكة الويب والتقنيات المرافقة لها، وتوافر الوسائل التكنولوجية القادرة على ربط التواصل بين الأطراف المشكلة لعملية التعليم عن بعد. وإننا إذ نثمن هذه المبادرة التي تأتي في الوقت المناسب بسبب ظروف الجائحة والإقبال المتزايد على وسائل التواصل وطرائق التدريس الحديثة، فإننا نشكر رئاسة جامعة القاضي عياض على انخراطها في تطوير التعليم عن بعد وتوفير الوسائل المادية واللوجستيكية الضرورية. كما نتقدم بالشكر الجزيل إلى كافة الشركاء داخل المغرب وخارجه، ونشكر القائمين على هذا النشاط في كلية اللغة العربية على المجهودات الجبارة التي قاموا بها خلال الأشهر الماضية لأجل إنجاح هذا اللقاء، ونرجو أن تكلل أعمالكم بالنجاح. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
So, thank you, Mr. Ahmed Qadim. And now with the word of the Director of Linguistics of Cultural Diversity, Mrs. Fatima Salem. The floor is yours.
شكرا سيدي الرئيس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين، السيدة نائبة الرئيس المحترمة الأستاذة فاطمة الزهراء إفلاحن، السيد عميد كلية اللغة العربية المحترم الأستاذ أحمد قادم، السادة الشركاء والمتعاونون والداعمون، السادة المتدخلون والحاضرون والمتتبعون، في إطار تبادل التجارب العلمية والثقافية والاستفادة مما راكمته الجامعات والمؤسسات الوطنية والدولية في تعليم وتعلم اللغات عن بعد. هذا الضرب من التعليم الذي أصبح اليوم وأكثر من أي وقت مضى ضرورة ملحة لا غنى عنها، يسرنا في مختبر اللسانيات وأنساق الثقافات بمراكش بشراكة مع جامعة أريزونا بالولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وجامعة محمد السادس تنظيم هذه التظاهرة العلمية الخاصة بتعليم وتعلم اللغات عن بعد. تتوزع محاور هذه التظاهرة على 4 محاور. هناك المحور الأول ويتعلق بتدريس اللغات عن بعد، المحور الثاني ويتعلق بتعلم اللغات عن بعد، ثم هناك محور يتعلق بتعليم أو تقييم تعلم اللغات عن بعد، ثم هناك محور يتعلق بالبحث في تعلم اللغات عن بعد. تتصدر هذه التظاهرة محاضرة افتتاحية يؤطرها أحد المهتمين بتوطين التكنولوجيا الحديثة أحد المهتمين بتوظيف التكنولوجيا الحديثة في تدريس وتعلم اللغات، وهو جاستن شوال من جامعة أريزونا. تليها مداخلات المشاركين في الندوة مصدرة هي أيضا بورقات علمية يقدمها متدخلون على رأس كل محور، وهي منظمة على الشكل التالي: هناك ورقة بحثية تتصدر المحور الأول تلقيها الأستاذة ألكسندرا إستريلا من جامعة أريزونا بالولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، وورقة بحثية تتصدر المحور الثاني تلقيها فضيلة الأستاذة مشكورة فاطمة الزهراء إفلاح من جامعة القاضي عياض، وورقة بحثية تتصدر المحور الثالث يلقيها فضيلة الدكتور مشكورا عبد المجيد بوزيان من جامعة الحسن الثاني الدار البيضاء. ثم يتصدر المحور الرابع ورقة يلقيها الأستاذ برايان سميث من جامعة أريزونا. ينظم هذا اللقاء بدعم من جامعة كوبرنيكوس والمعهد العالي الأوروبي وماستر الترجمة التابع لجامعة القاضي عياض، فلهم ولكل المتدخلين والداعمين والحاضرين جزيل الشكر وعظيم الامتنان. وأود أن أتوجه بشكر خاص إلى السيد عميد كلية اللغة العربية على دعمه المتواصل، وإلى اللجنة المنظمة برئاسة الأستاذ محمد جعفري على ما بذلته من جهود مضنية خدمة للبحث العلمي وإرساء لقيم التعدد والتعاون. مرحبا بالجميع والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thanks a lot, Mrs. Fatima Salami, the Director of Linguistics and Cultural Diversity Lab. Now, and thanks a lot, Fatima Zahra Iflahan, the President, the Vice President of
You're muted, Si Mohammed.
So, thanks a lot for all these people who have just said word on behalf of the institutions, to the participants, to everybody present here and elsewhere, and who have contributed to this conference. We would like again to thank these institutions, and the conference has just started, and we'll start with the conference keynote speech. It will be delivered by Dr. and Professor Justin Shewell, who is a friend, first of all, of Moroccan people, of Marrakesh, of University Qadi Iyad. And he was here, he liked Morocco, he loved Morocco, and he would like to be here in person again. Thank you, Shewell. This presentation, this speech will be moderated by Derek Thurber and curated by Tanya Pinkerton. All these people, lovable people from Arizona State University, the floor is yours, Tanya and Derek Turb. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, and hello, welcome. It's definitely my pleasure to welcome Dr. Justin Schul, who is an educational technology specialist at Arizona State University's Herberger Institute for the Design and the Arts, to give our keynote speech.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to be here. I wish I could be there in person, but things as they are, I'll have to maybe come back at a later date. It's nice to see everyone and to work with Qadi Ayad University and the other universities in Morocco again. I'd like to preface my speech this morning by mentioning that even though I'm talking about things related to online, a lot of the things that I say work in both online and face-to-face settings. So I know in some parts of the world, things are starting to move back in person. And so even if you're in a situation where maybe you're moving from online back into face-to-face, a lot of these same principles will apply. So I'm going to mention some strategies or talk about some strategies for engaging and empowering learners online. Before I do that, I want to talk about some of the specific needs that students have in online learning that might be different from face-to-face learning. And then I'll give you my definition of engagement and empowerment, what I think those two terms mean. And then finally, I'll present the strategies for engaging and empowering students. So when you look at face-to-face and online learning, there are some differences. And a lot of times I think the differences get in the way for teachers. They focus a lot on the differences rather than the similarities of online teaching and teaching face-to-face. In the United States, in our teacher training programs, we often will talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is the pyramid there on the top. And Maslow was a psychologist, and so he created this pyramid of needs. And it's a pyramid because the needs on the bottom have to be fulfilled before you can reach the needs on the top. So he starts with physiological needs. You need to have air, food, water. And if you don't have those things, you don't care about really anything else. You know, if you're drowning, you don't care about anything except getting your next breath. And then you have safety needs, and then love and belonging, and then esteem, and then finally self-actualization. And this is where self-actualization is where a person wants to become better than they are. And so this is where students actually care about learning. So in order for a student to care about learning and want to learn, all of the other needs below that have to be met first. So based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I created what I call the online hierarchy of online learning needs. And similar to Maslow's, the needs at the bottom need to be fulfilled before you can reach the needs at the top. And so the first level there is equipment needs. And if the students don't have the equipment to connect, they don't have an internet connection, they aren't able to get to the online space where you're working, then they won't be able really to do anything else. The second level there is environment, and the students need to have a place where they can focus on their learning, a place where they can learn, wherever that might be. But if they don't have a place where they can sit down and set up the computer and work, then they won't be able to do much else. The third level there is community and interaction. And this happens almost naturally in face-to-face learning because people talk to each other, students work in groups, etc. It's just natural. In online learning, though, this has to be very deliberate. Teachers have to create opportunities for students to interact and teachers have to create opportunities to build community in the classroom because the students are often isolated by themselves. And so feeling alone in online learning can be very demotivating. And so it's important that teachers work in opportunities for students to interact and to work together. The fourth level there is self-reliance. And again, this is probably a major difference. In face-to-face learning, if a student has a question or they can't figure out how to do an assignment, they can just raise their hand and the teacher can come over and help them. But in online learning, especially if you are asynchronous, where you're not working together at the same time, the student has to solve the problems by themselves. If they have a question on an assignment, they have to know how they can get help. If their technology is not working, they have to know how they can get help or how they can fix it themselves. And so this is something that students have to be taught. They have to learn how to do this a lot of times. And then finally, I put creativity in the place of self-actualization, because I think that without creativity and opportunities to use language that they're learning, students won't learn very quickly and won't learn very much. And so in the classroom, teachers are already doing creative assignments. Students work on projects, they work in groups, they do things together. But a lot of the online activities before the coronavirus pandemic, a lot of the online activities were sort of very simple. Things like studying vocabulary words on Quizlet or practicing grammar, a lot of that rote memorization type activities. And if that's all the online learning that students are doing now, when they aren't able to do in-person learning, then that can cause, then their learning experience is very diminished. And so it's important that we work in a lot of those same creative projects and assignments into our online learning experience. So let me give you my definition of engagement and empowerment. For me, the term empowerment is equal to choice. When you give students choices about their learning, that increases their ownership in the task that you've given them. It becomes something that they want to do because they feel this connection to it. So an example of this is my daughter is a junior in high school, and her teacher gave them an essay that they had to write for their English class. And rather than just saying, here is the essay topic, write about this, the teacher gave the students several topics they could write about. And I thought that of all the topics on the list, I thought my daughter had picked the hardest one. And she was having a hard time coming up with some ideas about what she was going to write. And I said to her, well, why don't you choose one of the other topics to write about? Because, you know, maybe you have more ideas about some of these other topics. And she said, no, I chose this one. I'm going to write about this topic, even if it's hard. And so to me, that was an example of her taking ownership in the task. And because she had made the choice, she felt more connected and more motivated to do it. And she did it in the end. She was able to come up with the ideas and write the essay. But that's just an example of how when you give students choice, they become more focused on their learning. Empowerment to me is also greater than engagement. When a student is engaged, when you are engaging students, the students then are focused on the teacher's choices and the teacher's goals. But an empowered student is focused on their own goals and their own choices. Again, because you've given them that choice, maybe it was your goal originally, but when you give the student the choice, then it becomes their goal and they become more connected to it. I have seen it many times where when I give students the choice over a project that they're going to create, they spend many hours learning skills that they need for that project that go beyond the requirements of the project, that, you know, beyond what I asked them to do. you know, I teach a class here because I'm a technology expert. I also teach a class in computers. And so students have to create a web page. And I have seen students spend hours learning skills to create a web page that I didn't require them to learn, but they wanted to learn because they needed it for what they had decided to create. So that's just, again, an example of how when a student is empowered because they've made a choice, they become much more focused on their learning. So let me talk about the strategies for engaging and empowering learners. The first strategy is to offer flexibility in assignments. Again, empowerment equals choice. I spent a lot of time in Korea, and my wife is from Korea. And one of the things I love about Korean food is rather than just one or two items on your plate like we have in America, you get a bowl of rice and then you have all these different choices of things you want to eat. And if there's something that you don't like on the table, you just don't have to eat it. And you can eat the things that you like. And so I'm going to equate, there are 4 levels of student choice that you can offer in assignments, and I'm going to equate them to different menu choices or food items. These levels of choice are not linear, but I do sort of order them 1, 2, 3, 4. And the levels 1 and 2 offer fewer choices than levels 3 and 4. So if you have students who are not used to having flexibility or having choices, then you might want to start with some fewer choices and work up to the higher levels where you're giving them more choices. So level 1 is just a simple or a single choice. I have 5 kids, and sometimes when we go out to eat, they like to go to these 2 restaurants. One makes hamburgers and one makes chicken. And that's all they do, hamburgers and chicken. And so their menus are very, very simple. And people love to go there because they do really well with just those simple choices. It's easy to make your choice for what you want to eat. And so when you give students a simple choice, it's easy for you as a teacher to plan and prepare for, and it's easy for you to grade because you have just one choice that the students are making. An example of this in an EFL classroom would be where you have students maybe reading the same book or article, but you give them a choice about how they're going to present their ideas from that article. Maybe they're going to write an essay or a blog post. Maybe they're going to record a video or do a presentation. Or you might have students all doing the same project. They're all going to give a presentation, but you give them a choice of topics that they're going to present on. But how many students they're working with, the groupings, the learning objectives, and the main assignment are all the same for all the students. So most of the things are the same for all the students, but you're giving them one choice or a simple choice. That's the first level. This level is mostly teacher directed because, again, most of the choices and the power are with the teacher. And you might have some students that are unmotivated or disinterested because, not everybody likes chicken, right? They might not like the choices that you give them, and so they would lack that feeling of ownership. Level 2 is giving multiple similar choices. So I mentioned already Korean food. One of my favorite Korean foods is a food called kimbap. This is a picture of it here. And it can be very simple or very complex. The outside is seaweed with rice, and the inside is a mixture of different ingredients. So essentially, whatever you want to put into the inside, you can change it however you like. And so I went to a restaurant one time in Korea that all they did was kimbap, but on their menu, they had 50 different kinds of kimbap. And so I was very surprised that there were so many choices of things I could put inside my kimbap. This type of assignment is a little bit more difficult to prepare and grade because you have a few more choices. But again, it increases the ownership that students feel. An example of this in the EF in an English classroom might be where you offer students a choice about what they're going to read and also how they're going to present their ideas. Again, writing an essay or doing a presentation, recording a video, etc. So you're giving them more choices. This level is a little bit more student directed. It gives a little bit more power to the students. The learning objectives are the same for the students, but they might have choices in something else like groupings or the project format or the topics. Again, and it increases their feeling of ownership because they have a little bit more control over what they're doing. Level 3 is where you give the students many limited choices. This might be, for example, if you go to a restaurant and you look at the menu, often restaurants have lots of choices on their menu. But all the choices on the menu were decided by the restaurant. The chef looked at the ingredients they have or what they know how to make, etc., and they put things on their menu. And so you're choosing from choices that the chef or the teacher already gave you. So as a teacher, you can create your own menu and let the students choose from that. Again, it's a little bit more difficult to prepare and to grade because you have to prepare the menu in advance and prepare what choices the students are going to be able to make in advance. And because you have more options now, you have to have more flexibility in grading. But students now have more power. They're choosing maybe their learning objectives along with their groupings and their project format and their topics. So an example in an ESL classroom, I have done this before where I give students a list of reading skills. And so they choose the reading skill that they want to improve. And then they choose what they're going to read based on the reading skill that they chose. And then they choose how to show me that they've improved that reading skill. And sometimes it might be keeping a log of how fast they're reading or keeping a journal, or they might give a presentation or write a report or many different choices. This is mostly student directed, so it gives most of the power to the students. And this is probably one of the ones where the students feel the most ownership because they have a lot of control over what they're going to do. But again, you have to be careful. If you give the students too many choices and they aren't used to having choices, they can feel overwhelmed. And sometimes the students might not have the background knowledge that they need in order to handle all the different choices that you've given them. So they might want to choose a particular reading skill, for example, but they don't have the knowledge they need to work on that skill. So if your students are not used to choices or lack the knowledge to handle so many choices, then it's often better to start with fewer choices and work your way up. The highest level in empowering students and giving flexibility is unlimited choices. And so this picture here I've put of somebody eating at home. If you cook at home, your choices are limited only by your skill as a cook and how much effort you're willing to put in. You might choose to have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich because you're too lazy to cook a big dinner, but that's still a choice, right? This is probably the easiest to prepare for teachers because all you have to do is come up with the project idea. But it's also the most difficult to grade because you have very little control over what students are going to produce. And the students are in complete control. They choose how many people they're going to work with. They choose their topics. They choose the learning objectives. They choose the resources, and they choose the product. So I've never done this in an ESL classroom, but when I was in high school, we did this where 3 weeks out of one of our school years, they just put us with a teacher and said, okay, you're going to work on whatever you want to work on for 3 weeks. And so I ended up creating a walking tour of our town. And so we had a lot of old buildings in our town. And so I went out and researched the history of the buildings and wrote up a brochure about each, with a piece about each building. And then that went in, I had to research how to print it, and I had to research the history, and I had to learn about writing. And so lots of different things went into it. And then that brochure was placed in the Chamber of Commerce in our town so that tourists to the town could come and they might see that brochure and then take the walking tour. And so I mentioned this example because that's one of the very few things I remember from my high school. I mean, I graduated from high school more than 20 years ago. So, I remember that experience, and I don't remember very many other things from high school. And that just shows you how impactful that learning experience was for me. This is entirely student directed. So the teacher, this gives all the power to the students and they feel the most ownership. And just because it's entirely student directed doesn't mean that it's without structure or without scaffolds from the teacher. The teacher can help students make choices and walk through the phases of the project. So for example, students might have chosen who they're going to work with in their topic. And then as a teacher, you might help them make a list of the resources they have that go with that topic. And then they get to choose which resources they want to use. Another strategy is integrating creativity, and this kind of goes along with that level of unlimited choices. So in education, we have what we call the design thinking process. It's actually all over industry as well, but the design thinking process helps students create those and develop those creative skills by walking them through this process of designing something. And so Dr. John Spencer uses the word launch to walk through this design thinking process. And so I'm going to present this with an example of something I did with my students. So the L in launch stands for look, listen, and learn. And the key here is that students are trying to gain awareness of a problem. So for one of our projects in my class, I sent my students out onto our campus in Tempe to just observe and find a real world problem that they could analyze and think about. And so one group of students noticed that the traffic on University Avenue near the university was very congested. There was a lot of traffic going one way and not a lot of traffic going the other way. And so cars were always backed up on University Avenue. And so they observed this and they thought that's a problem that maybe we can figure out how to solve. And so A stands for asking questions or ask questions. And that leads to the U, which is understanding of key concepts. So in these two stages, students are having an authentic research experience. And they might do lots of different things to ask questions and to understand key concepts. They might conduct interviews, they might read articles, they might observe or analyze data. So my students, as they stood there on the corner of that intersection and observed for an hour, and they realized that the traffic signals were the same interval, the same duration going both ways, but there was a lot more traffic going one way than the other way. And so they noticed this and through their observations. The N stands for navigate ideas. And here students are brainstorming solutions for the problem, applying what they've learned and the concepts they understood. And so here they're essentially generating ideas and a concept of something that they're going to produce. So my students decided that it was a good idea to ask the city of Tempe to make the traffic lights stay green longer in one direction, and they decided that they were going to write a letter to do that. The C stands for create a prototype, and they might be creating anything really in this stage. It could be something physical like a letter. They might organize an event like a job fair. They might create a new system, or even they might create a piece of art like a sculpture or a painting if that is what they decide solves the problem that they're trying to fix. So again, my students chose to produce a letter. So they drafted the letter to the city of Tempe, and they explained the traffic light problem and the evidence that they found and why they thought extending the interval would solve the problem. And then the last step, the H, stands for highlight and fix. And so this is where students are evaluating the product they've created, and they're sort of going through an iterative process. They're highlighting problems, they're fixing it, they're going back and looking again and finding more things and fixing it. So in this stage, my students created the final draft of the letter that they planned to send to the city of Tempe. And so when students launch and then they get into space, so to speak, once they've gone through this design thinking process, they're ready to send their work out into the real world. And this is where they're going to get feedback from real people. And it might send them all the way back to the L part of the stage and they have to start all over again, or they might just find something with their product that they can fix and send it out again. So my students, I sent the letter to the city of Tempe for my students, and they got a response back from the city of Tempe saying that they had received the letter and that they would look into the solution the students had proposed. And, you know, that was, I mean, I think it was kind of a form letter, but my students were so excited that they had gotten real response to something that they had produced. The third strategy is encouraging collaboration. And by encouraging collaboration, this is where you get a chance to build that community I was talking about before, and where students get to give peer feedback to each other. So ways that you can encourage collaboration, one of the ways is to make sure that your assignments are complex. If an assignment is too simple, then the students don't have to work together. They can do it on their own, or they'll work together just, you know, a little bit because they need to. So you want to make your assignments complex enough that the students can't do it on their own. They must work together because there's too much for them to do on their own, okay? Projects that use the launch process I just described are a good example of this. You also want to teach your students how to do teamwork. You know, teamwork doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. They have to be taught. You can't just assign students to like each other and work well. So you can model what successful collaboration looks like. You can work on team building skills like leadership and decision-making, trust building, etc. And you can establish expectations for things, for collaboration, and for when they have problems, what they're going to do. And then finally, or not finally, but you can eliminate free rides. And by free rides, I think everybody knows one of the biggest problems you have in working with a group is not everybody does the same amount of work. And you might have that one student who doesn't really do anything, but because they were a part of the group, they got the same grade. And so ways that you can work around that problem are, one, I create small groups and everybody in the group has a job that they have to do. And I let them choose the jobs, but I tell them, here are the jobs, here are the roles, and here are the things that each job has to do, and then they choose the job that they're going to do in that group. Another thing I do is I assess the students both individually and as a group. So there are parts of the project they turn in individually for a grade, and then parts of the project where they turn it in as a group. And then I also have the students evaluate their own contributions and their peers' contributions. And so they're giving each other grades on how well they worked together. And I found this picture of the birds on the rhino, but this is actually not a free ride for the birds. The birds actually pull out insects from the back of the rhino. So it's more of a symbiotic relationship, which I thought was really interesting. And the last thing for encouraging collaboration is to foster diversity. So a lot of times as teachers, we try to put students with the same skill sets into the same group because it's easier for us to work with them. They're all at the same level of English, they have similar personalities, etc. But when you're doing complex projects, it's often better to have a mixed group because you have different personalities and different skill sets that then combine to produce something better. The fourth strategy is flexibility in class participation. And what I mean by this when I say class participation, online students need to have some flexibility for things like whether they're going to turn their camera on or not, for example. I had a student who never turned his camera on in class, and I was meeting with him during office hours, and I asked him why he never turned his camera on. And he turned his camera on for me during office hours so I could see. He was sitting in the bathroom because during the pandemic, he had gone to visit his friends in California, and then the pandemic hit and he was there in California kind of stuck because he couldn't really travel. And so he was in his friend's apartment and he was doing his classes in the bathroom because that was the only place he could go where he had that environment that wasn't, where it was quiet so he could work. But he obviously didn't want other students in the class to see him in the bathroom. And so he kept his camera off. And so you might have students that have similar circumstances where they might be uncomfortable showing their home environment to their classmates, or they might not want their picture, their image captured by other students who take screenshots, or they just might have internet connections that are bad. And so, if they have their camera on, then that makes the connection worse for them. You also want to make sure that you're doing lots of comprehension checks. And by comprehension checks, I mean you're asking lots of questions and you're checking the student's understanding. One thing I do in class is I use live polling. I use an app called Socrative, but there are lots of other technology solutions for asking students questions online. But even if you didn't have technology, students could do something as simple as holding up a paper or a small whiteboard to the camera with their answer on it, or even just responding in Zoom using the thumbs up or the raise hand or different things like that to show that they're listening and that they're understanding. When I say here remote mindset, at ASU during the pandemic, we used what we called ASU Sync, where we taught in person and also had students on Zoom remotely. And so I had to consider the remote students first because they weren't in the classroom. They couldn't see what was going on as easily, et cetera. And I had one time where I had one student come to class and all the other students were on Zoom. And I like that face-to-face interaction. And so I ended up staring at the one student the whole time. And I'm sure it was really awkward for that one student. But it's very easy for teachers to focus on the students in the classroom and forget about the students who are online. And so thinking about those online students first helps. And you might do things like move as many of your activities outside of your live classroom sessions, right? Move them into asynchronous, and you might try to make sure you plan, similar experiences for students who can't attend the live sessions for whatever reason. The last strategy, and I'm just going to summarize really quick, is to allow students voice. And essentially this means to let students provide feedback, let them set their own learning goals, teach them how to communicate effectively, allow them opportunities to assess themselves as well as their peers. And I am going to stop there and move to Q&A.
Thank you, Dr. Schull, for those really empowering words, engaging words about how to empower our students. We do have a couple of questions that we'll try to address quickly that have come through in the chat. The questions in particular that have come through are a lot about how to help students make the choices when you give them those choices. So how do we support students in making those thoughtful choices and getting them to challenge them to make the harder choices, maybe that might push their thinking when they need to?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And again, if students aren't familiar with having choices, I mean, I have been in classrooms where the teacher does all the thinking for the students, and I've probably been guilty of doing that myself, especially in my early days of teaching. And so some students might not be used to making choices. And so you have to train them, work up to making choices, give them small choices at the beginning, and then, move up to making bigger choices. And also, you help students by providing advice and support as they make their choices. So I often equate it to, for example, a student in America, when they graduate from high school, they have the choice of which university they're going to attend. And that's a big choice. Choosing the university you're going to attend could affect your career, it affects your life. So a lot of students are afraid of that. And as a parent or a teacher, you can help students make that choice by helping them research the different universities, look at the different options they have for programs, et cetera, and then, just talking through it with them, right? And providing them those scaffolds and support.
Great. And one other question, then we'll move on. How do you address choice when students may be missing foundational skills, for example, fluency in a given language?
That's also a very common problem in the United States. We talk about this idea of differentiating instruction. When you have students in a classroom, for example, in America, a lot of second language or non-native English speaking students are in the same classroom with native English speakers. And so you have students who might not understand some things because of language problems where all the other students do. And so how do you teach all those students together at the same time, but make sure that each one is successful? So a lot of times you'll do things like provide additional materials for the students who need it, such as glossaries for vocabulary or extra reading assignments to help them learn about the topic. Or you might have one article that is at different levels of reading. You have the full article for those who can understand it, and then a simplified version for those that need the simplified version. And usually I'll put all of those materials online, and I'll tell the students that here's all the resources that you need to learn and prepare for this project. And then I put it on the students to go and do that. And then I check their understanding before we start to see, do they understand the vocabulary? Do they understand the topic or the concept? And if they don't, then I'll maybe send them to go back and study some more, or I might have to do some review with the entire class, or it just depends on the situation.
Great, thank you again. Unfortunately, I wish we had more time to answer some more of these questions, but we do need to move on to the rest of the conference. So thank you again for these words and for a great keynote to kick us off. I think next we have Dr. Estrella Silva, who will be delivering the opening for the distance language teaching strand of this conference.
Hello, everybody. One second, let me just get my screens organized here. Well, thank you. Hopefully you're able to also see my PowerPoint. And I'd first like to begin, thank you, Derek, for the introduction. And I'd first like to begin by thanking the organizers for today's event. The University of Qadi Ayad, Mohammed Polytech University, Linguistics of Cultural Diversity Lab, the Faculty of Arabic Language, and ASU, and all those that have had their hand in organizing and putting this event together. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today and hope my presentation adds to the conversation and focus of this conference. As Derek mentioned, my name is Dr. Alexandria Estrella Bridges. I have previously taught in primary and secondary settings and continue to be involved in the classroom to collect research and to inform my practice as a teacher educator. I'm a native born to Arizona in the United States, but have had the pleasure of traveling to the beautiful country of Morocco and several years ago. So I'm disappointed we couldn't do this in person, but grateful for the opportunity to engage with you online today. So just to give some more context of my role here at Arizona State University, as I said, clinical assistant professor, and I serve as a lead strategist for the EML program. So EML program defined as Educating Multilingual Learners program. So what this program focuses on is preparing future teachers for linguistically diverse classrooms and dual language classrooms, with providing students with an English as a second language endorsement or a bilingual endorsement. And in my discussion today, I will address topics related to linguistically preparing teachers for a more equitable classroom experience via online or via in person. So during my discussion today, I hope to resonate with the Moroccan educational context, and in tandem, I wish to share my own personal experiences with my research and teaching English in the Arizona context as well. And to preface my presentation today, I would like to highlight some critical areas or identities or intersections of identities that I feel influence and impact learning and engagement in the classroom. And again, I feel these are definitely present either online or also in person as well. And I know I'll be focusing a lot on the linguistic perspective, but I feel it's important to recognize and acknowledge all of these elements and ideas of intersectionality in the classroom as well. So these elements include language, citizenship, land, regions, and rights, socioeconomic or even social status, and race and religion. So when we think about these ideas, I think it's important when we consider building communities, as Dr. Schull mentioned, and recognizing student voices, to also value and identify these elements and identities that are present by our students in the classroom as well, and by our teachers that we're preparing to enter these classrooms. So for language, when we think about language status, right? We think about how we as teachers as we're preparing teachers, equip them for the opportunities to value, or sometimes when we recognize and reflect on how we're undervaluing language varieties present in the classroom. How are we valuing, recognizing language status that may be present and unpacking that as we're going through the learning in the classroom? And even when we think about accents, are we engaging in practices or trying to be accepting and valuing of languages, or trying to eradicate accents accents in the classrooms? When we think about citizenship, we think about ideas about what kind of rights or lack of rights are involved in depending on our citizenship and our citizenship status. And thinking about also ideas of land, regions, and rights, I think it's important when we think about these ideas from a critical perspective on how we are afforded resources and access, and also denied these same resources and access depending on lands we reside on or lands that we own. Same ideas with socioeconomic status or even social status. We have ideas about how we are able to have certain levels of privilege depending on our socioeconomic or societal status, and other perspectives on how we may be limited on this privilege, and how all of these factors influence our learning in the classroom. In addition to ideas about race and religion, and how these ideas about the socio-political and socio-historical environments have influence on all the things students carry and all the things teachers carry when we're going into the classroom and learning. So all of these elements intersect in the classroom, and maybe more than one at a time. And they have great influence on how teachers teach, how we engage students, how we ourselves as teachers engage with students and assess students in the classroom. So if we consider these elements and identities under distant learning, the dangers of inequities are exacerbated by access to quality educational experiences. Based on our language proficiencies, our delivery and instruction online, our socioeconomic status, and all influences how we have access and what we have access to in the classroom. So even things, artifacts such as internet, access to internet, laptops, computers, teachers prepared to teach online, all become crucial to the learning that occurs in online spaces. So next I will provide an example of how these factors intersect from an Arizona context and make connections to how this may relate to a Moroccan educational experience. So for Arizona, language policy has had a huge role in how content is delivered across thousands of classrooms in the state. So currently, and for some time, Arizona has had the strictest English-only mandates across the United States. This has impacted many English language learners in primary and secondary classrooms. And this impact has been very detrimental to the learning of English learners in the classroom. This has stifled access to instruction in languages other than English and has contributed to dismantling many dual language programs within the state. So these were restrictive language policies, unfortunately contributed primarily to language loss for many emergent bilinguals or English learners in the classroom. They may have come in with 2 languages and then going through a very English-only mandated classroom experience, they may have language loss and begin to learn and practice more English and lose that primary language or that second language they have in the classroom. So this limited or no access to bilingual or biliteracy development is important to recognize. One second, I think the screen just changed. Dr. Shuel, did you share your screen?
No, it looks like somebody turned on the whiteboard.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I see your face there. Okay. I'm sorry, I cannot share my screen. I think somebody turned on the whiteboard. And I guess I can continue and see how we can. I know you cannot see my screen, and as soon as the whiteboard goes off, I will continue to share my screen. So I'll just continue speaking as we're moving forward because I know we have limited time. So as I was saying, these restrictive language policies unfortunately contributed to a lot of primary language loss for English learners in Arizona. And they have very limited access to dual language classrooms or to bilingual or biliteracy development when these whole initiatives of restrictive language policies started. So I believe some of this has similarities to the Moroccan educational experience when there is struggle to access appropriate language of instruction to access content. So this is also reflected in how government decisions and state policies have great influence on what goes on in the classroom. So when we consider all of this, we can see how complex the educational experience is, even before we begin to observe and analyze practices occurring in online spaces.
Please, with your permission, Professor,
Mm-hmm.
so we would like to refer to the map that you have just shared about there is Morocco, but it's not complete as a map. There is no Sahara there. We should refer to that. We should refer to that. And
okay.
Yeah, our friends also in the United States will not accept that. So would you like please to, so we refer to that, and then would you like please to continue and go to the next slide?
Yes, I can do that. Thank you.
We are sorry to say that.
No, it's okay. I totally understand. Thank you for letting me know. Is that fine? Is that okay now?
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, so it is clear to, as we begin to talk about these ideas of language policies in the classroom, it is clear that the pandemic disrupted our educational system and how we go about the educational system in the classroom. And many assert was already losing relevance, right? So in the classrooms, we're continuing to focus on traditional teaching with academic skills and rote learning rather than critical thinking and adaptability. So in thinking about this, we understand that the pandemic has pushed us to jump into online spaces. And this presented very many unexpected barriers. So this created some ideas about, were teachers ready to teach in a digital platform? Did students have access to appropriate internet resources and access to even internet? And then the ideas about how we begin to maintain engagement in the classroom. And how is that different from when we understood the pedagogical strategies to have engagement in face-to-face classrooms, and how that changed or looked differently in online spaces and online classrooms. So when we think about that, we also think about, well, how does this affect and what do we need to think about in preparing teachers to go into the classroom? So in order to go in more depth into how we linguistically prepare teachers for a more equitable classroom experience, I will share a brief overview of a study my colleague, Dr. Kaveh, and I are doing in primary dual language classrooms. So our study examines language ideologies of 6 primary classroom teachers from diverse ethnic and linguistic backgrounds. So we focus on understanding their unique language journeys, their affirmations, and challenges that contribute to teachers' language ideologies as bilingual or multilingual individuals as dual language teachers and in multilingual classrooms. So our research questions involve: what are teachers' perceptions of themselves as bilingual or multilingual speakers? So when I think about this, I think about in terms of our platform as scholars here and preparing teachers to go in the classroom. I think it's critical and very important for us as teachers, for us to understand how we allow teachers to unpack their identities as bilingual speakers or multilingual speakers in the classroom. We have all had experiences here of how our language or perceptions of how we speak English or languages other than English, Arabic, French, how our perceptions of others is very influenced on how we speak these languages. So I think it's really important for us to help teachers unpack how their experiences influence on how they teach in the classroom, how they engage students, what the language varieties that are present in the classroom, what affirms these experiences of being a bilingual or multilingual speaker, or what undermines these ideas of being a bilingual or multilingual speaker. Because all of this connects to the ideas of how these language ideologies, which I think is the most important question and focus, is how all these language ideologies and thoughts about language influence what we do in the classroom, how we teach, what we are engaging in, how we're engaging students in the classroom, whether it be in online spaces or in-person spaces. So just to go under some ideas of the theoretical underpinnings of this research, but also in thinking about how this relates to teacher preparation and how we can more appropriately linguistically prepare teachers to engage in the classroom with students. Some of these theoretical framings come from the ideas of language ideologies, our belief systems that we carry in the classroom, and how these have a lot of impositions of power and how of these influence what goes, as I spoke, as what goes on in the classroom. In terms of the ideas of also looking at the United States, of how these language ideologies have been framed by the history of colonization, specifically in the United States. And for example, in looking at the language of English, the United States as a country has never officially acknowledged English as its national language, but the discourse around politics, media, print, and education have all imposed this idea of English language being the language of our country. So all of these factors come into ideas about how this influences our practices as teachers in the classroom. When we go into these ideas of ideologies, we also consider some of the lit review that connected to our studies, ideas about societal ideologies, how we begin to understand how we have deficit views of some linguistic and cultural practices that may be racially or linguistically or culturally or socioeconomically influenced by how we view these certain groups of students or teachers in the classroom. So being very intentional about how we help teachers understand their own perceptions of themselves or try to unpack any deficit views they may have about certain languages or practices in the classroom. Then there's ideas about linguistic purism. So this overemphasis on ideas about valuing appropriateness or correctness in the classroom. So we have students coming in and having accents or, having these ideas about trying to go between one language to the next, how we as teachers are supporting students in developing that bilingualism or biliteracy in the classroom. How we think about these ideas about linguistic purism and how we think about and value language varieties in the classroom. And through all of this, we also think about the ideas about how, when we're thinking about building community or understanding student voices in the classroom, also valuing the ways that we have this ideas about language of symbolic power that exists in the classroom, and how we have rewards or privileges, and sometimes we can provide these rewards or privileges to certain language varieties, while we also at the same time devalue or silence other students in the classroom. So with these ideas, we look at how these educational policies and practices and institutions such as schools uphold and we have opportunities to transmit the symbolic power of certain languages and language varieties in the classroom. So for this study, and I know I'm not going to fully in depth for a consideration of time for this presentation, but our general findings from this study in thinking about multilingual and bilingual classrooms was ideas about how we have these language ideologies and our self-perceptions about bilingualism in the classroom. It is a lot influenced by, again, our societal experiences, our families, our regions of where we grow up. All of these elements have great influence on how we teach in the classroom. And I think, if anything, in teacher preparation, we have the opportunity to develop this space for teachers and future teachers to unpack these ideas about self-perceptions about languages, their own bilingualism or their both bilingualism or multilingual identities in the classroom. And then thinking about credentials, how are we preparing teachers to go into private and public sectors in the classroom, and being very aware of the access that students have in private schools versus public schools, and the inequities that exist in there, and how in teacher preparation can we dismantle some of those barriers that are present in those different spaces for students. And then how do we begin to affirm the bilingual identities or multilingual identities of teachers in the classroom, of students in the classroom. So when students are, graduating from or promoting from primary to secondary settings, that we're affirming that we're preparing them in the best way that we can to be bilingual or multilingual in the classroom and in society as they move forward throughout their lives to serve as bilingual and multilingual speakers. So for the implications, so in terms of what does this mean in terms of how does this influence teacher preparation or research in the classroom and practice in the classroom? I think it's as we begin to talk about these things, we can recognize how important it is for us to understand teacher burnout, right? How even complex this is before we begin into analyzing the practices in the classroom. But I think it's important because teachers carry a lot of responsibility, a lot of weight as they go into the classroom of what they're doing, making choices of how they're doing it and why they're doing it and what language they're using to do it. So that's a lot of responsibility for teachers. So it can lead to a lot of emotional labor and teacher burnout. Which is why also I think in Morocco and also in Arizona, we have a teacher shortage, right? Because there's a lot of responsibility that goes into the context of being a quality teacher and providing that engagement. So looking at how those ideologies and providing the space and time for teachers to unpack these ideologies and understand how it transcends into their practice, I think is highly important in any teacher preparation program, because as Ansantula states that I am my language. So when we think about creating community, we think about ideas about giving students voice. I think that directly aligns with the ideas about understanding students' language, understanding their identities and the intersectionality of who they are, where they come from, what they speak, what they experience, what they've understood, you know, their families, their culture, their community, their environment. All of that intersects into how we begin to bring community and build relationships with our students in the classroom, even more so in online spaces. How do we begin to understand and promote that in online spaces and not revert back to a lot of the rote learning in the classroom that doesn't allow for these things to be addressed and unpacked and have that level of engagement? So with that, sometimes we have these ideas of needing to have healing and reflecting and naming and unlearning a lot of hegemonic ideologies in the classroom, not only for how we prepare teachers, but allowing teachers to understand how they can do this for students as well in primary and secondary settings. So as we begin to go on, and I know I'm reaching the end of my time limit here, so I wanted to end with this quote, but I hope that these ideas and thoughts also added to your thinking about how we begin to value and prepare teachers from a linguistic perspective, and allowing that opportunity for us to talk about our ideologies, talk about how we think about language, how we're practicing this in our classroom as we teach content in the classroom. And as we engage in the next few days with all these wonderful presentations about how to maintain engagement, assessing students online, I end my presentation today with a quote that I definitely value from Bettina Love. And this quote states, "Our education system is allergic to change and comfortable with oppression. So if the system is not physically and theoretically pushed to stay in the direction of progress, it will revert back to its obsolete purpose." So I just value that in terms of valuing all of you and the work that we do, because I know that it is definitely not an easy job, and encourage all of us and, you know, to work as a support system and maintain our collaboration in any way that we can to help each other to build a teacher preparation program where we're able to acknowledge and move and progress in the way that benefits teachers, future teachers, and students also in primary and secondary settings. And I thank you all today for this opportunity to speak. And again, I apologize for any disruptions with the slide or anything that was offending in any of the slides that I presented there. So I thank you for bringing that to my attention, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Dr. Estrella, for your thoughtful remarks on teacher preparation, and thank you for opening the strand on distance teaching. I do believe we're going to take a moment to try to fix the translation. Is that true?
Dr. Jafari, did you want to take a moment to fix the translation?
So I think we should do things from the inside the website. If we do that, it will restart, I think. No problem?
No problem. I think we all have the link and can rejoin in a moment with the translation corrected.
So 2 minutes, and then I think if we do that, we should do it from the website about Zoom, the inside it. That was wonderful. Okay. Is that so? Can we do that?
I think the sooner the better, Professor.
Yeah.
So shall we rejoin in a minute or two after we've changed that?
Yes, okay.
I will just put the link in the chat in case anybody's misplaced it. And
Yes.
we can
Yeah.
rejoin
Yeah.
in a minute or two.
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you.